Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks is joining us, and it's a full episode dedicated to Kansas football. Who would have thought that this was coming in the middle of the season? It's here now. Let's do it. We're talking all things Jayhawks. How do we get here? Where do we go? Where does Lance Leipold go? Hopefully he stays. All that kind of stuff is coming up next on the show.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Derek, you are the host of Locked On Jayhawks. I'm the host of Locked On Big 12, but also a Missouri alum. Big rivalry here, but I just feel like I get so much joy from watching Kansas football. I'm like this close to ordering a Kansas football shirt. And I have to tell you this, my girlfriend is a Missouri Tiger. We met at school. She has threatened all kinds of things. Hey, you'll be single if you do this. I'm not sure I can say, I think I just have to order one. I think I have to say, you know what, whatever happens, happens. I'm so enamored by the Jayhawks right now.
It's crazy because during basketball season, you're used to being, kind of the target on your back. You're the blue blood. Everybody wants to see you lose. And then you get to football season, and because of how things have gone recently, everybody is just like that. Like they're on board. Like obviously, if you are a diehard fan of somebody they're playing, like Houston doesn't want to see them win or something like that. But it was so I don't know. It's almost like heartwarming when you saw too, because there was the Scott Van Pelt comment on, I want to say it was Friday night on SportsCenter, where he just kind of, it was never like we're for sure going to Kansas if they win this week at Houston, but he kind of threw it in there like, who knows, maybe game day could be in Lawrence if Kansas wins in Houston. And they win in Houston. Duke's 3-0 as well, and then they pick the Tennessee-Florida game on Sunday. And to not just see like people locally kind of try to flame ESPN and game day and stuff for not going there, but to see other people like yourself, like college football national fans be upset that they didn't go to Lawrence. It was kind of heartwarming.
I mean, Tennessee, Florida happens every single year, right? And I forgot who we were talking to last week on SiriusXM Big 12 Radio, but they were like, look, if Duke is 3-0 and KU's 3-0, because they're not just playing any team. It's a basketball powerhouse who's also 3-0. And also, I think for as good of a job as Lance Leipold has done, Mike Elko deserves a ton of credit for what he's done over there at Duke. But look, pay to fly Coach K out. Get Bill Self there. Lead into the basketball part of it. I mean, I've been to Lawrence, Kansas. They would go, and look, it's a basketball town, whatever it is. They would go nuts if game day was there. I think the problem, Derek, is it's a Fox Sports 1 game. That's the big problem here. We'd be doing 2 Fox games in a 3-week span if we had game day there, which is the ultimate problem, and I hate that. But it just kind of speaks to, I mean, what is the pitch right now? Is it a fever pitch in Lawrence about Kansas football? Is it just kind of this is great, or is it legitimate excitement because of the way the football team is playing?
I think after the West Virginia win, it was, okay, this is a cool story. They're clearly better than they were in past seasons, past regimes, and they're starting to figure things out. But the Houston win, because you're talking about a Houston team that just took Texas Tech to double overtime. So that's kind of a reference point of competition. I know it doesn't always work with the transitive property and everything, but they took Tech to double overtime in Lubbock. And if not for that big 4th down conversion, they win that game. KU was playing in Houston. That wasn't really even a game in the 4th quarter. It was them just kind of steamrolling through, right? So you start to kind of go through the list, and it's not to say that Kansas is going to beat Texas Tech, but it's to say that, okay, Kansas is maybe on that same kind of tier as Texas Tech, as maybe TCU. Obviously, they beat West Virginia. Kansas State losing to Tulane. Maybe those 2 teams are closer than we might have thought before the season obviously started, to where you can start to get yourself to say, maybe some of those games are more winnable than we thought. Maybe if they go 2-2 in those 4 winnable games or something like that, then all of a sudden you're competing for a bowl. So that's what the Houston win felt like, because of the fact that it wasn't just a win. It was a win that you kind of just rolled through the second half of. After you get down 14-0, you go on a 42-7 run at one point. it's starting to feel like the conversation is changing from, hey, this is a cool story, to all of a sudden, like, and if you're saying this from a national perspective in terms of, are they a top 15 team? Like, no, obviously not. But from a perspective of, are they just like a good football team? Yes, it feels like that is what's actually happening here. It's just.
So, Derek, I mean, let's talk about this offense that's been so fantastic. I mean, I think to me, the big thing is they can threaten to run the football on every single day. And look, they've been efficient passing, somewhat efficient passing. So I got crushed. Actually, what are your thoughts on this first? So I took some heat from Jayhawks fans who like watch tape. And they were saying Jalen Daniels is a better passer than given credit for. Well, the Tennessee Tech game was awesome in terms of efficiency. He was low 60s in the next two games, which is fine. It's not bad. But to me, what I'm seeing is I think, number one, the design of the plays is fantastic. Number two, he's not 110. Like, I think he opens up some of the passing stuff with his legs, which is fine. That happens. A lot of NFL quarterbacks are doing that. And three, I think he's coming along as a passer, which means that there's more room for this offense to grow and get better, in my opinion. So what are your thoughts on the offense and my assessment of Daniels as a passer? Do you think I'm being too harsh? I love Jalen Daniels. I think he's an amazing leader. I think he's maybe the most important player in all of college football this year to a team. I mean, you cannot take him away from this team. They're as good. But what are your thoughts on this offense and maybe the room to even get better than they are right now? The number one offense in efficiency in all of America.
Yeah. So like, I would say there's obviously room to grow there, and that this is, or it has been more of a running team than it is a passing team, especially when you look at the triple option and everything. He's still putting up bigger numbers than we've seen from a KU quarterback in a long time, though. Over 8 yards per attempt. He's first in total QBR on ESPN, which that does take into account some of the other stuff as well. The biggest thing that I can compliment him on is the third downs. Like, KU has, and I think you see this a lot, teams that have good quarterbacks tend to convert third downs more than ones that don't. And there's other things that go into that, like down and distance. And when KU is running the ball well and setting themselves up in third down and short, third down and medium, it's going to be a more desirable situation for Jalen to throw in. I think that's what we've kind of seen here, though. He has been money, and when they've needed passes, he's completed them. He has been so clutch at doing that. The big question for me, it's not that I don't think he can necessarily do it. It's kind of an unproven thing at this point. What happens if KU faces a team this season that they're not able to run everywhere, right? You had 200 rushing yards against West Virginia. You ran at 6.5 per pop against Houston, 280 rushing yards. Obviously against Tennessee Tech, you were able to just do whatever you wanted on the ground in that game. What happens in a game where KU only has 120 rushing yards, or the defense is able to key on that, or KU is in a lot more 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 8s? We've seen him convert some of those. That'll be the question for me. So it's not that I don't think the talent is there. Like, the arm talent on the kid is there. He has the ability to scramble and move around in the pocket. It's just that we maybe haven't seen it a ton necessarily, because this hasn't been a pass first offense or a team that has been set up in a lot of those downs, which is a good thing, but certainly it'll matter more. Like, if you're playing Baylor, you can't expect to run for 280 yards against Baylor.
And honestly, actually, that was an example I used, like them in particular, right? But here's the thing. We're talking about a Kansas team that 3 games in, we haven't had to ask that question because the offense has pushed people around up front. And I'll give the guys this. I think also the receivers have done a great job blocking. I mean, they've run the ball. I mentioned the other day, and they mentioned on the broadcast, the KU game on the radio, they've run counter, they've run inside zone, they run outside zone, they've run sweeps, they've run, power, they've run the RPOs, they've done the whole series. They've done all of it. And I think that's what's most impressive, is that this team has been coached and executed to the point where it's not mattered what West Virginia or Houston or Tennessee Tech, but still on the road, it hasn't mattered what the other team was doing. They've been able to execute after getting punched in the face to perfection. And that's what we'll touch on too. They've executed perfection. They need to stop being the fighter that has to get knocked down first before they can get back up and going. You mentioned Baylor. It won't work against the Bears. Probably won't work against Oklahoma State. Probably won't work against OU. It won't work against Texas, I don't think. Those 4 teams. But They're 3-0 to this point. It has worked. Might work against Duke. I think the next step here is we got to start fast.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of that is on the defense because they've done a good job adjusting. But, you have to, I think even this week against Duke in a game where they have been so far, kind of a weak schedule. So we'll see what it looks like against, more of a Power 5 team. We saw them obviously against Northwestern, but Northwestern's kind of struggled there. But Duke has been really good at running the football. And that was something last week against Houston that, like, if you take out the sacks that KU got against Houston, they were averaging over 5 yards per carry. That was a bugaboo of the defense last year. They gave up over 6 yards a pop on the ground. That was the worst number in the Power 5. That was one of the worst numbers in the entire country. So, like, you kind of want to see that number be a little bit better. But yeah, it's just something where you can't continue to chase points, and they've done a good job chasing or not doing that, in that when they have gotten down 14-0, or in the West Virginia game 14-0 and 21-7, of still just sticking with the offensive identity and being like, hey, we're down 14, we're not going to rush it, we're still going to run the football and everything, we're not going to rush our system and just all of a sudden start airing things out everywhere. But what happens if the slow start leads to you being down 14 into the second half, as opposed to the first quarter or the second quarter? That's where the problems arise. So there is a lot of pressure, I think, on them to come out swinging on that defensive side of the ball specifically. Offensively, even though it has maybe led to them being down 14-0 or 21-7 in the last couple of games, they still have been able to get it going early, maybe just not on the first drive. It's the defense that I want to see if they can kind of pick it up in the early going of the game.
Yeah, and so do you think my assessment of them being an old school Big 12 defense is right? I mean, I think they have a talent to not be, but it feels like when they play Oklahoma State, right? It feels like it's going to be all right, we're going to give it up a little bit. But when Spencer Sanders makes that mistake, we're going to turn it into a first and goal, a first down inside the red zone, or a touchdown. Like, that might be the right approach this year for this defense. And look, I'm not saying that's the approach you always want, but for a team that's coming from a 2-10 season to hang with a top level team in the Big 12, like, that might be the approach they need.
Yeah, we actually had this conversation on, I forget if it was my radio show or Locked On last week, of like, is Kansas just turning into prime Texas Tech? You know what I mean? Like,
hell yes.
Like maybe, right?
Hell yes. But they run the ball instead of throw it as much.
Right. Exactly. They're like a kind of Coastal Carolina type-y offense where it's like this spread option type of thing. Tulane kind of does the same thing. But yeah, they're becoming that, where it's like last year they gave up 42 points per game. This year the defense is better. There's more talent. There's more depth, but they're still giving up a lot of yardage to where you're going to be in some of these shootouts. It's 42-42 at the end of regulation against West Virginia. You give up 30 points to Houston in that game, to where for Kansas to have to win these games, they're going to have to put up high 30s. They're going to have to put up 40-something points because the defense isn't one that's just going to completely stop you. So, yeah, you do have to, if you're not going to be a defense that is just stalwarts on that end, you have to find ways that you can make up for it. So like what you said with the turnover stuff, can you be opportunistic? Can you force more turnovers? Can you come up with the big strip sack or interception like we saw Kenny Logan off the tipped up ball in the air off of one of his linebackers? Like, can you come up with those key plays? Can you come up with drives where you're able to bend but not break? That was something last year's team didn't do a good enough job of either. Last year's team bent a lot and they broke a lot. They gave up, like I said, over 40 points per game. But the red zone numbers of opposing teams in the KU red zone last year, it was over like 80% of drives ended up in touchdowns. And the gap between them and the 8th best team in the Big 12 last year in red zone defense, I think it was Texas Tech, was like the same distance as the gap between the 8th best team to the 2nd best team in touchdown percentage in the red zone. So just being more opportunistic, like that might be enough for the defense to just make improvements from last year. And given how good the offense has been, maybe that is enough for this team to go bowling.
The guys that cover 3, I believe, call it red zone roulette is the term they've coined it. And here's the thing. You have to be good enough, though, to play red zone roulette. And like KU was not last year, and they are this year. And that kind of gets us to the point of development. This program is going, and the head man. The thing about Lance Leipold is, if this guy was, it's really interesting because if he was in his 30s, you'd have some questions about, like, is there a track, his track record? Like, is he established enough? He's 59, 58. Is that correct?
I believe 58. I don't know when exactly his birthday is, but yeah.
So the boy still, like, not that he's going to die anytime soon, but like he is older-ish. And for a guy who's that age, who's been in college ball for a long time, if a Nebraska comes calling, I mean, you have to at least consider it. And you and I talked last week, we talked in the roundtable about, look, like, would Nebraska love hiring Lance Leipold, all the fans? Probably not. But they don't go to bowl games. And so what's the first step to becoming anywhere or to even seeing if you can become what old Nebraska was? And I know you all, people at KU, obviously, Missouri person too, like, that stuff's not lost on us. We still follow the other Midwestern teams closely. The first step would be hiring a guy who, like, the floor is going to be a solid foundational floor. The ceiling, I've got no clue. But the guy's won titles at Wisconsin Whitewater. He won MAC titles at Buffalo. And I'm not saying win a title here at Kansas, but, like, good Lord, man, that's not a good program. It's not been. We all know this, but they are dangerous this year. And all of that stuff into account, why would you not want that? The next key for, Travis Goff and company is making sure it's worth his while to stay at KU.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend about this earlier today, and he said, at what point, if you're Travis Goff, at what point, if you're Kansas, do you offer up like the Mel Tucker contract, like what he got at Michigan State, that 10-year, $95 million deal? Is that too crazy? Does KU have that type of money? I don't know. He's making like $2.5 million now by the end of his contract, because it goes up a little bit each year. I think it's up to $3.5 million by the time it's done. David Booth just gave, I don't know, maybe a handful of years ago, he gave like $50 million like up front for KU to build facilities and stuff. If you're a big donor at KU, I think priority number one at this point, even though they are trying to work on some stadium renovations and other facility upgrades, is probably, hey, what money can we muster up? Because we know Nebraska being in the Big Ten, you're going to be making $100 million a year with the Big Ten money. You're going to have more opportunities for those facility upgrades. You're going to have more opportunities to pay more for your assistants. You're going to have more NIL money to go around. All those things matter. And obviously they're going to be able to pay Lance Leipold, if that's who they decide to go with, a lot of money. So what can you do to KU, if you are KU, to make this as difficult a decision as possible? Right now, it's not just about the contract money of how much you can pay him. Right now, the buyout is only $4 million, which in this day and age in college football is nothing. Or I should say it's $5 million. It goes down to $4 million in December. But, like, you see schools paying 15, 17, 20 plus $1 million to get out of coaches or buy other coaches out elsewhere. So any way that you can to try to lure him in and keep him around at KU is going to be of vast importance for this program moving forward.
And the one thing is, like, no matter what happens in the SEC or the Big Ten money-wise, Kansas will always maintain their competitive edge in basketball. They like, is that fair to say? The donor base will not let them become uncompetitive. Is that fair?
Yes, correct.
I think maybe you should apply. Like, here's the thing. If my Missouri Tigers played your Kansas Jayhawks on a neutral field, which actually I think they're going to play football here pretty soon. Am I correct in that? Yeah.
I believe next season.
Yes. Mm-hmm. If they played today, Kansas might beat them by like 2 scores, right? And being able to say that is important around where we went to school. That's an edge worth paying for, in my opinion, right? To be able to be semi-competitive in the Big 12, like, who knows, right? Jalen Daniels might be those kinds of guys might be unique, but the model, the way that Lance Leipold always tailors his team's approach to his players' strengths at a place like KU, that's valuable. And I'm with you. Whatever the Mel Tucker contract means in Kansas terms, right? I don't think it's the same money, obviously. We're not talking about that much, but whatever that Mel Tucker deal is, I guess the Godfather deal, if you will, it's worth paying, in my opinion, because of what he obviously does with the level of talent that he has.
Yeah. And I think when I was talking about this earlier with someone, the way he phrased it in asking to me was, do you do that if they make a bowl game? And my response was, I do it right now. You know what I mean? Like, but before any more of this Nebraska stuff continues on.
Doesn't matter. Right.
And so I think, especially like, you know, you're in a weird position here where I think this is going to have a lot of, I guess, long-term impact on the Big 12 in general, because think about it. If the top two candidates right now, I think BetOnline released an initial list, and Lance Leipold, I want to say, was 6th or 7th on the odds list. He was 10-1. Matt Campbell was the favorite. I saw another betting site today that updated the odds, and it had Matt Campbell at 1. It had Lance Leipold at number 2 on the betting odds. So, I mean, you're not just talking about what's this going to have an effect on Nebraska, but part of the conversation of how good is your program going to be in your conference, it's not always just about you. Like it is if you're Alabama or you're Georgia, of course, it's about you. You're getting all the best players, right? So you don't really need to worry about what other team is doing because you're just going to be better than them. But from certain programs, sometimes it's about, well, what program is down? What program is going to open up the avenue for us to surpass them and be better than them? And for so long, Iowa State was a 2 or 3 win team until Matt Campbell kind of took over, right? So if you're talking about the Nebraska job, if they hire Lance Leipold, does Kansas go back to what they were? And now all of a sudden, West Virginia is like, okay, great. We don't have to worry about losing to Kansas like we did this year. Or if Iowa State loses Matt Campbell, does all of a sudden that vault a school like Kansas or some of these other schools above an Iowa State and they drop that back down again? Like, it's crazy how much the Nebraska job, even though they're no longer in the Big 12, could have an effect on the Big 12.
I think the one good part of this is that a lot of people there think they're better than Lance Leipold, which they're not. But I actually think it's an advantage for KU, right? We mentioned like this is when if I'm Travis Goff, man, I'm in the room like tomorrow morning, or like, you know, I'm making sure we're doing this now because look, like they've contacted Urban Meyer. All right. That is something they have now, whether that is a, you know, do you want the job? Who do you think should take the job? Matt Campbell will be number 1. I think also his age would probably lend to that too, right? Kind of makes more sense where he is. And so I think, while Lance Leipold, I'm not saying he's not worthy of the job, but maybe take the time where he's not the number 1 guy to make sure he's not the number 1 guy because you're paying him too much money. That's how I feel about it. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree. You want to make it as difficult as possible because you're right. There's going to be, whether it's age, whether it still is track record. It's, you know, one of those things where it's hard to describe to a fan. Like we have seen it before, right? When Gene Chizik went to Auburn from Iowa State, where the record wasn't great, but it's hard to get the donors. It's hard to get the fan base on board when that's not there. Lance Leipold could still have a 6-6 season for Kansas, which would be, you know, huge party here in Lawrence if you make a bowl game, right? But then when you see it running across the ticker on ESPN, if you're a Nebraska fan and you're not like in the weeds of college football of what 6-6 meant at Kansas, you're seeing it come across and you're going 8-16 in his 2 years at Kansas. Why is this guy coming to Nebraska? So you're right. It's not the sexy hire. I think it would be a good hire, but you're right. There's going to be other guys above him on the list, whether it is a Matt Campbell, whether it is, who knows if like a Mark Stoops or something like that would take the job. I would imagine Matt Rule is going to get fired some point here soon from Carolina. Who knows where he would be on the list if he wants to get into the coaching game right away or take a year off or what that is. But there's going to be other candidates in front of him. So you're right. Try to make it as unappealing to Nebraska as possible so you can further him down the list, because who knows what coaches are taking the job, who knows what coaches aren't taking the job, and how far they're going to go down that list.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it's going to be very, very, very interesting. Also, our friend, I'm sure you talked to him before, Jesse Newell, obviously now covers, I think, was he covering the Chiefs now?
Yep.
Does a fantastic job. He said at 5 wins, they build the statue of Leipold. So we're 2 away from Jesse's prediction there, them building the statue. Derek, love Locked On Jayhawks. I'm so glad to have a Kansas host now. And I'm so glad you got to come on board for this awesome season. Where can people find you? If they find the show, let them know where to get their Jayhawks fix. Because we have a lot of Jayhawks fans talking shit to me in the comments. So I'm sure you'll have the more brighter view of it. Where can they find you in your work?
Yeah, so go to Locked On Jayhawks. You can find it anywhere you find your podcasts. You can subscribe to the show so you're always catching everything. We're going to be up on YouTube shortly. I think that'll be next week. But for now, you can check out all the audio side of everything. And obviously, you can give me a follow. I'm going to put all my work on my Twitter page, which if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it right below, at D Johnson Radio.
All right, Derek, man. Appreciate your time as always.
Absolutely. Anytime.